Social Security is not part of this budget deficit. We know how to do minor things to fix Social Security long term and take care of seniors and their health care needs and their increased costs. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Oregon is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be ended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm pleased to rise this morning to support adoption of a consumer price index for Social Security that would accurately reflect the costs that our senior citizens actually face. And I'm delighted to join Senator Brown of Ohio, who is presiding in this effort, along with Senator Mikulski of Maryland. Social Security is a promise, a bond between our government and our senior citizens. Our senior citizens have worked hard their whole life and paid into Social Security every step of the way. They expect that Social Security will be there for them when they retire. Over the past few years, I've heard from many Oregon seniors who are making ends meet on a fixed income. And they tell me, why is it that we're not getting a cost of living adjustment, a COLA? Because our costs are rising. And they've been deeply disturbed to know that with these fixed incomes and these rising costs, that they're being squeezed in the middle. And I explained to them in these town halls that it's because the COLA is calculated not on what seniors face in their costs, but upon what a broad cross-section of working people face. And they tell me, well, you know, Senator, that's different than the costs we face. We're at a different point in our life. Health care becomes a huge component. And I can tell you, they tell me, I can tell you, Senator, health care costs are not going down. So some in this chamber are coming forward with a proposal that would make things even harder for our seniors. It would use a new calculation, not this standard cross-section of America COLA that we're currently using, but what is referred to as a chained CPI. And that chained CPI says, well, if the price of this goes up, you can buy that. And actually, what it does is go the wrong direction in terms of accurately reflecting the costs that our seniors face in retirement. If you take someone who's 65 today and you look down the road, by the time they are 75, this chained CPI would cost them $560 per year, roughly a month's rent. By the time the average 85-year-old has their payment calculated, the chained CPI would cost them $984 per year. The average 95-year-old, $1,392 per year. At a time when the best-off Americans are paying less than ever before, it is simply wrong to shift costs onto our seniors and most vulnerable in our society. There's an alternative. It's called the CPIE, the Consumer Price Index for our seniors or elderly. I prefer to think of it as a CPIE for experienced. Our most experienced citizens face different costs than the rest of us, and the CPIE would track inflation specifically based on the basket of goods that those 62 and older are purchasing. It is simply a fair and more accurate way to calculate the benefits for our seniors. If their costs are rising slower than the overall cost for society, it would reflect that. If their costs are rising higher than the overall pace of inflation, then that would be reflected. Either way, it's fair. We have to ensure that we are keeping our promise to our senior citizens in a way that accurately reflects the reality of living in this country. This bill for the CPIE, or Consumer Price Index for the experienced, is the best way to achieve that. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
The majority leader is recognized.
Unanimous consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection, so ordered.
Has the bill of the day been reported?
No. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to the consideration of S. 1867, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 230, S. 1867, a bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2012 for military activities of the Department of Defense, for military construction, and so forth, and for other purposes.
Mr. President,
Majority leader is recognized.
the Republican leader is on the floor. He's going to offer an amendment. The one on this side is not ready. There's been an agreement, and I ask unanimous consent that Senator McConnell be allowed to lay down his amendment when the one on the Democratic side is laid down, which will be momentarily, that it would be considered the First Amendment in order.
Mr. President, I send an amendment to the desk and ask its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report.
Senator from Kentucky, Mr. McConnell.
I ask consent that reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, very briefly, just let me say I'm offering this amendment on behalf of the Senator from Illinois, Senator Mark Kirk, because the time has come for our country to sanction the central bank of Iran. It's become commonplace for political leaders to state that an Iranian regime armed with nuclear weapons is unacceptable. President Obama has stated that an Iranian regime armed with a nuclear weapon is unacceptable. Unfortunately, the Iranian regime has not been deterred from conducting activities relevant to the development of such an explosive device. The report of the IAEA of November the 8th, 2011, makes clear that Iran has worked on the development of an indigenous design of a nuclear weapon, including the testing of components, and that Iran has yet to answer all of the IAEA's questions concerning the military dimensions of Iran's nuclear program. Last month, the world learned of the Quds Force plot to assassinate the ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the United States. Iran remains undeterred, and the United States is left with fewer options of dealing with the Iranian nuclear program as time elapses. This amendment by Senator Mark Kirk from Illinois would add to the current sanctions against Iran by targeting the central bank of that country. This, in my judgment, is one of the few remaining actions short of an embargo of Iranian shipping and military intervention to slow or end the Iranian nuclear program. It is worth supporting and pursuing. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senior senator from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. President, on behalf of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I'm pleased to bring S. 1867, the National Defense Authorization Act, for fiscal year 2012 to the Senate floor. The Armed Services Committee approved the bill by a unanimous 26-0 vote. This is the 50th consecutive year that our committee has reported a Defense Authorization Act. Every previous bill has been enacted into law. I want to thank all the members and the staff of the Senate Armed Services Committee for the commitment that they've shown to the best interests of our men and women in uniform as we have developed this legislation. Every year we take on tough issues and we work through them on a bipartisan basis, consistent with the traditions of our committee. I want to particularly thank Senator McCain, our ranking minority member, for his strong support throughout the process. The unanimous committee vote in favor of this legislation would not have been possible without his cooperation and support. We were delayed in getting this year's bill to the Senate floor by two issues that have arisen since the time that the Armed Services Committee approved the first version of this bill, S. 1253, in late June. First, Congress enacted the Budget Control Act of 2011, which mandated deep reductions in discretionary spending, including defense spending. The initial bill, reported by the Armed Services Committee, would have cut the President's budget request for national defense programs by more than $6 billion. The Budget Control Act, which was adopted after our initial bill was reported, requires an additional $21 billion in reductions. Second, the administration and others expressed misgivings about the detainee provisions in the initial bill. Although the provisions in our initial bill represented a bipartisan compromise that was approved by the committee on a 25-1 vote. Many of these concerns were based on misinterpretations of the language in that bill. Nonetheless, we have worked hard to address these concerns. Excuse me. First, relative to the additional $21 billion in budget cuts. We consulted closely with the Department of Defense before identifying these cuts. We believe that the reductions that we decided upon can be accomplished without an adverse impact on our troops or their vital missions, and without significant increase in risks to our national security. The committee report, which accompanied the initial bill, Senate Report 112-26, did not address these cuts, but is otherwise applicable to this bill as well. So the new cuts are not addressed in that Senate report because these new reductions came after that Senate report was made. And for this reason, I ask that a summary of the cuts be included in the record immediately following my statement.
Is there objection?
Unanimous consent.
Is there objection? So ordered.
Second, the new bill would modify the detainee provisions to address concerns and misconceptions about the provisions in our initial bill. In particular, the new bill, first, modifies Section 1031 of the bill as requested by the administration to assure that the provision, which provides a statutory basis for the detention of individuals captured in the course of hostilities conducted pursuant to the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, the AUMF, to make sure that those provisions and that statutory basis is consistent with the existing authority that has been upheld in the courts and neither limits nor expands the scope of the activities authorized by the AUMF. It also modifies sections 1033 and 1034 of the bill, as requested by the administration, to impose one-year restrictions rather than permanent limitations on the transfer of Gitmo detainees to foreign countries and on the use of Department of Defense funds to build facilities in the United States to house detainees who are currently at Gitmo. We were unable to agree to the administration proposal to strike Section 1032, the provision that requires military detention of certain al-Qaeda terrorists subject to a national security waiver. We did, however, adopt a number of changes to the provision. In particular, we modified the provision so that it clarifies that the President gets to decide who makes determinations of coverage, how they are made, and when they are made, ensuring that executive branch officials will have flexibility to keep any covered detainee in civilian custody or to transfer any covered detainee for civilian trial at any time. Second, we clarify that there is no interruption of ongoing surveillance and intelligence gathering activities or of ongoing law enforcement interrogation sessions. There have been misstatements, misimpressions, misinterpretations of the provisions of our bill relative to those issues. We clarify them to make sure that it is clearly understood by this body and by the American people that it will be repeating, it is the executive branch determined by the President, by people that he appoints, who will make determinations of coverage, how they are made, when they are made, so that it ensures the flexibility that the executive branch wants to keep any covered detainee in civilian custody or to transfer any covered detainee for civilian trial at any time. It's been suggested that ongoing surveillance and intelligence gathering activities by law enforcement people would be interrupted, or that their interrogation might be interrupted. It is very explicitly clear in this bill that there is no such interruption. There is no such interrogation session interruption or surveillance interruption or intelligence gathering activities interrupted. The process to make sure that that doesn't happen is in the President's hands. The administration officials reviewed the draft language for this provision the day before our markup, recommended additional changes. We were able to accommodate those recommendations, except for the administration request that the provision apply only to detainees who are captured overseas. And there's a good reason for that. But even here, the difference is relatively modest, because the provision already excludes all U.S. citizens. It also excludes lawful residents of the United States, except to the extent permitted by the Constitution. The only covered persons left are those who are illegally in this country or who arrive as tourists or on some other short-term basis, and that's a small remaining category, but an important one, because it includes the terrorist who clandestinely arrives in the United States with the objective of attacking military or other targets here. Contrary to some statements that I've seen in the press, the detainee provisions in our bill do not include new authority for the permanent detention of suspected terrorists. Rather, the bill uses language provided by the administration to codify existing authority that was adopted by both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, and that has been upheld in the federal courts. Moreover, The bill requires for the first time that any detainee who will be held in long-term military custody anywhere in the world would have access to a process that includes a military judge and a military lawyer. I want to repeat that, Mr. President. For the first time, this bill provides that in determining a detainee status, that detainee will have access to a lawyer and to a military judge. That is not the case now. Nor would the bill preclude the trial of terrorists in civilian courts, as some have erroneously asserted. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, it's the contrary. The bill expressly authorizes the transfer of any military detainee for trial in the civilian courts at any time. An amendment that eliminated that authority was defeated in the Armed Services Committee on a bipartisan 19-7 vote during the markup of the initial bill. The bill would not require the interruption of ongoing surveillance operations or ongoing law enforcement interrogations of suspected terrorists, as some have incorrectly asserted. The opposite is the case, as I have said, because we have included language in the bill that specifically precludes those possibilities. The bill also provides that the President, not Congress, will decide who makes determinations of whether a detained person is in the narrow class covered, and the President will decide how and when these determinations are made. The bill would not require that al-Qaeda terrorists who are captured on American soil be transferred to military custody, because it includes an easily effectuated national security waiver. With this waiver authority, executive branch officials may keep any detainee in civilian custody or move any detainee to civilian custody if they choose to do so. The provision provides the executive branch flexibility to choose the most appropriate course of action for al-Qaeda terrorists whom we capture, including detention in civilian custody. That was the intent of the original language, and it has been clarified in the bill before us. I recognize that the administration remains unsatisfied with this provision, but we've gone a long way to address their concerns. Now, what about the dollar provisions in this bill? The bill that we bring to the floor today would authorize $662 billion for national defense programs, $27 billion less than the President's budget request, and $43 billion less than the amount appropriated for fiscal year 2011. I'm pleased that we were able to find these savings without reducing our strong commitment to the men and women of our armed forces and their families, without undermining their ability to accomplish their important national security missions. In a time of fiscal problems for our nation, every budget must be closely examined to identify savings, and the Department of Defense budget is no exception. This bill contains many important provisions that will improve the quality of life of our men and women in uniform, provide needed support and assistance to our troops on the battlefield, and make the investments that we need to meet the challenges of the 21st century and provide for needed reforms in the management of the Department of Defense. First and foremost, the bill before us continues the increases in compensation and quality of life that our servicemen and women and their families deserve as they face the hardships imposed by continuing military operations around the world. For example, the bill would authorize a 1.6% across-the-board pay raise for all uniformed military personnel, and extends over 30 types of bonuses and special pays aimed at encouraging enlistment, re-enlistment, and continued service by active duty and reserve military personnel. The bill provides that annual increases in TRICARE Prime enrollment fees in future years will not exceed the percentage increase in retired pay. The bill authorizes $30 million in supplemental impact aid and related education programs for the children of service members. The bill authorizes service secretaries to carry out programs to provide service members with job training and employment skills training to help prepare them for the transition to private sector employment. And it authorizes the service secretaries to waive maximum age limitations to enable certain highly qualified enlisted members who served in Iraq or Afghanistan to enter the military service academies. The bill also includes important funding and authorities needed to provide our troops the equipment and support that they will continue to need as long as they remain on the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan. For example, the bill fully funds the President's request for $3.2 billion for the development, testing, production, and sustainment of the MRAP vehicles and the new MRAP all-terrain vehicles, which are needed to protect our troops against improvised explosive devices. The bill authorizes $11.2 billion to train and equip the Afghan National Army and Afghan police, the funding level recommended by the commander of the U.S. Central Command after consultation with the commander of U.S. and coalition forces in Afghanistan. And the purpose here is to grow the capabilities of those Afghan security forces to prepare them to take over increased responsibility for Afghanistan's security as we begin reductions in U.S. forces. The bill provides $400 million for the Commander's Emergency Response Program in Afghanistan and $400 million for the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund to support projects that enhance the counterinsurgency campaign. The bill extends the authority of the Department of Defense to conduct a program for the reintegration of former insurgent fighters into Afghan society. The bill establishes a new Joint Urgent Operational Needs Fund to allow the Department to rapidly field new systems in response to urgent operational needs identified on the battlefield. It provides the Central Command, CENTCOM commander, new contracting authorities needed to stop the flow of money through U.S. contracts to persons who are actively opposing U.S. forces in Afghanistan. The bill contains a number of provisions that will help improve the management of the Department of Defense and other federal agencies. For example, the bill would address shortcomings in the Department of Defense's management of operating and support costs, which are estimated to constitute 70% of the life cycle costs of major weapons systems. The bill freezes DoD spending on contract services at fiscal year 2010 levels and requires the Department of Defense to take a number of common sense steps to achieve savings in this area. The bill adds $32 million for the Department of Defense's corrosion prevention and control, requires implementation of the recommendations of a recently congressionally mandated report on corrosion control on the F-22 and F-35 programs. The bill improves the management of defense business systems by strengthening the authority of the Department of Defense's chief management officers in the investment review process and ensures that this process covers existing systems as well as new ones. The bill adds $43 million to enable the Department of Defense IG to provide more effective oversight and to help identify waste, fraud, and abuse in defense programs, especially in the area of procurement. In light of the budget constraints that we face this year, The committee worked hard to keep funding increases of any kind to a minimum. We added the following items: $66 million for unfunded requirements identified by military leaders, $90 million for investments in programs like the DODIG and corrosion control that have high payback rates, $63 million for critical investments in intelligence and cybersecurity improvements, $497 million for increased funding needed to ensure the efficient execution of ongoing Department of Defense programs, and $270 million for a handful of broad-based competitive programs needed to help us keep the leadership in military technology. Now, I continue to believe that it would be wrong for us to give up the power of the purse given to Congress in the Constitution. I don't believe the executive branch has a monopoly on good ideas. In fact, I think we are more often receptive to creative new ideas that can lead to advances in the national defense than the defense bureaucracy is. Nonetheless, there are no earmarks in this bill. Finally, I would like to discuss 4 major issues in the bill that were the subject of extended discussion and debate in the course of our markup this year. First, this bill includes provisions that would require sound planning and justification before we spend more money for Marine Corps realignment from Okinawa to Guam and on tour normalization in Korea. These provisions follow detailed oversight that Senators Webb, McCain, and I have conducted over the past years. In particular, the bill prohibits the expenditure of funds for Marine Corps realignment from Okinawa to Guam until we receive an updated force laydown and a master plan detailing construction costs and schedule of all projects necessary to carry it out. The bill requires the Department of Defense to study moving Marine Corps aviation assets currently at Marine Corps Air Station Futenma to Kadena Air Base, and the feasibility of relocating some or all Air Force assets currently at Kadena Air Base rather than building a replacement facility at Camp Schwab that is unrealistic and unaffordable. The bill prohibits the obligation of funds for tour normalization on the Korean Peninsula until the Secretary of the Army provides Congress with a master plan, including all costs and schedule projections, to complete the program, and the Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation performs an analysis of alternatives justifying the operational need. The Department of Defense's current plans for Okinawa, Guam, and Korea were developed years ago in a different fiscal environment and are projected to cost billions of dollars more than anticipated. At the time of tight budgets, we owe it to the Department of Defense and to the taxpayers to insist on a close examination and strong justification before we proceed. Second, the committee adopted an amendment to strike all funding for the Medium Extended Air Defense System, MEADS. In February, the Department of Defense announced that after investing more than $1.5 billion in the MEADS program, the program remained a high risk, and the additional funding needed to field the system was unaffordable. However, the Department declined to terminate the program because the Memorandum of Understanding with our allies, on which the program is based, commits us to continued funding even if we withdraw from the program. For this reason, the Department requested over $400 million in funding for the continued development of a system that it has no intention of fielding. The committee amendment eliminates this funding. We recognize that under the Memorandum of Understanding, our decision not to fund this program could require the United States to pay for a program in which it is no longer participating. However, the committee concluded that the course proposed by the Department is untenable and that the Department should explore all options with our allies before continuing to fund a program which we no longer need. Third, our committee members share both a deep concern about the rising cost of the Joint Strike Fighter program, on which we are now projected to spend more than $1 trillion, which includes operation and sustainment costs, and a strong belief that the Department of Defense must take stronger action to contain these costs. The committee unanimously adopted an amendment requiring that the next JSF contract be entered on a fixed price basis and that the contractor assume full responsibility for all costs above the target cost specified in the contract. This amendment puts the contractor on notice that we have lost patience with continued overruns on the program. We're determined to protect the taxpayer from further cost increases without unnecessarily jeopardizing the heavy investment that we've already made in the program by prematurely terminating the program. And Senator McCain has taken really the active lead in this effort, and it's a very critically important effort for our taxpayers. Finally, the bill includes a bipartisan compromise regarding detainee matters, as I've made reference to before, a provision which addresses a series of important issues that relates to detainees. It's worth summarizing the detainee-related provisions in the bill. First, the bipartisan compromise would codify the military's existing detention authority as stated by both the administration of President Bush and the administration of President Obama and approved by the courts. Second, the bill would require military detention for a core group of detainees who are part of al-Qaeda or an associated force that acts in coordination with or pursuant to the direction of al-Qaeda and who participate in planning or carrying out attacks or attempted attacks against the United States or its coalition partners. That is a defined core group of detainees. This provision includes a national security waiver and includes language expressly authorizing the transfer of detainees for trial in civilian courts. It continues the conditions on the transfer of Gitmo detainees to foreign countries, including certification requirements to be met before a transfer may take place. Contrary to what some have said, this provision does not prohibit transfers from Gitmo. In fact, it is less restrictive of such transfers than legislation passed in the last Congress and signed by the President. In particular, this year's provision includes a national security waiver that is designed to address concerns expressed by the Secretary of Defense about a similar restriction which was included in last year's Authorization and Appropriation Acts. The bill contains the same limitation on the use of Department of Defense funds to build facilities in the United States to house Gitmo detainees that has been included in past Authorization and Appropriation Acts. This provision applies only to Department of Defense funds. It does not prohibit the use of Department of Justice funds that might be needed in connection with a transfer for the purpose of a criminal trial, and it does not prohibit the closure of Gitmo. The provisions require the Department of Defense to issue procedures addressing ambiguities in the review process established for Gitmo detainees. The provision clarifies but does not overturn the executive order issued by the President earlier this year. The provisions require the Department of Defense to establish procedures for determining the status of detainees, including, as I indicated before, for the first time, a military judge and a military lawyer for a detainee who will be held in long-term military custody. The bill clarifies procedures for guilty pleas in trials by military commission. This provision would require a separate trial on the penalty, with a unanimous verdict needed to impose the death penalty. So while a death penalty could be imposed by a commission, the detainee would have no assurance of that result. Those are the detainees who want that assurance so that they can make themselves martyrs. As I've already indicated, these provisions have been substantially modified as a result of extensive discussion with administration officials. We did not make every change requested by the administration, but we adopted many of them, probably most of them, and made additional changes to address specific concerns raised by administration officials. Mr. President, as we are here today, we have over 96,000 U.S. soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines on the ground in Afghanistan, with 23,000 more remaining in Iraq. While there are issues on which we may disagree, we all know that we must provide our troops with the support that they need as long as they remain in harm's way. Senate action on the National Defense Authorization Bill for fiscal year 2012 will improve the quality of life of our men and women in uniform. It will give them the tools that they need to remain the most effective fighting force in the world. Most important of all, it will send an important message that we as a nation stand behind them and appreciate their service. So we look forward to working with our colleagues to promptly pass this important legislation. And as I yield the floor again, I want to thank Senator McCain, all the members of our committee for their hard work on this bill, our staffs for their extraordinary capability, and again, I want to thank personally Senator McCain for everything that he has done to make it possible for us to get to the floor at this time. I yield the floor. Excuse me, Mr. President.
If I could offer the amendment and call for regular order with respect to the amendment.
Mr. President, I now
Is this filed, right?
Mr. President, pursuant to a unanimous consent request which was previously entered into on this matter, I sent to the desk an amendment on behalf of myself and Senator McCain.
Clerk will report.
Senator from Michigan, Mr. Levin, for Mr. McCain, proposes an amendment number 1092. At the end of subtitle C of Title 8, add the following.
Mr. President, I now would ask unanimous consent that further reading be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
I would call for the regular order with respect to the amendment.
The amendment is now pending.
Is it now pending first in line?
It is pending first in line.
I thank the presiding officer, and I just want to make one quick comment about this amendment. This is a bipartisan amendment that addresses the massive issue created by counterfeit parts getting into the defense supply system. It is something which our staffs have investigated heavily. Senator McCain and I are introducing this bipartisan amendment. We hope it has strong support in this Senate, and it will address a critically important issue which we have now seen in the defense supply system, with millions of counterfeit parts, mainly from China, getting into our defense system, threatening the security of our troops, the effectiveness of their mission, and costing the taxpayers a heck of a lot of money as well. And before, I've already yielded the floor, but if, with the permission of my friend from Arizona, I have 11 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet today during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I would ask unanimous consent these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I also ask unanimous consent that Captain Michael Lynch, a U.S. Army aviation officer who is currently serving as a defense fellow, be granted floor privileges for the duration of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2012. This is a defense fellow in Senator Reed's office.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank the President.
The senior senator from Arizona is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to engage in a brief colloquy with Chairman Senator Levin.
Without objection.
First of all, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to again thank you for the long years of work we've had together, and this is the culmination of this year's work. which is coming to the floor after great difficulty and a lot of obstacles. And I want to thank you again for the spirit of bipartisanship, which is a long tradition in the committee, which was practiced by our predecessors. And obviously, we know on occasion that we have differences of views, and sometimes we, especially me, express those in perhaps a passionate manner. But the fact is, at the end of the day, we continue to come together and work together for the good of this nation's security. And the reason why I ask Senator Levin is because I think our colleagues ought to understand the context of this bill. First of all, it is a new bill, and it has a reduction of some $20 billion in authorization in order to keep with the Budget Control Act, and a total now of $27 billion reduction, which is a significant amount of money. And it seems to me that our colleagues should understand that this $9.8 billion cut in defense procurement, $3.5 billion cut in research, development, test, and evaluation, $1.6 billion cut in military construction, $6.7 billion in overseas. These are significant reductions already in what we had originally envisioned as necessary for our nation's defense capability. And so I would ask the Chairman, these are painful decisions that we had to make, and those that somehow believe that it's business as usual in the Department of Defense and on the defense authorization, it simply is not correct. We have already made significant reductions. I would ask my colleagues.
I agree with my friend from Arizona. We literally worked months to get to the first reduction, which was in our original bill, and then when the Congress adopted the Deficit Reduction Act, which required additional reductions, these are very, very difficult decisions to make because it, in many cases, will increase risks, which we don't want to increase, but nonetheless have got to accept some additional degree of risk in some of our programs in order to do the fiscally responsible thing. And I agree with my friend.
Could I ask my colleague also just two more points? One is that we also have planned for an additional well over $400 billion reductions in the next decade. And those will, again, entail at some point an increase in risk. So in that context, I would appreciate, again, the expression of the Chairman's view of a draconian cut that would take place as a result of sequestration. Secretary of Defense has testified before our committee of the, quote, devastating effects, as have the majority, our military leaders.